made, he did talk about quite a few challenges: connectivity, content, cost of devices, computer literacy, competitive tariff. So I would like to call it something like the 5C syndrome. Connectivity, one of that is one of the National Optical Fiber Network. I'm directly connected with it. So I think quite a lot of onus is on the institution of BBNL to put it in place, and I do accept responsibility that there's been a delay in it, and we do hope that there will be brighter days ahead. Content, yes, I would like to look at this listening that we are a multilingual country. We need to have a lot of language content. I think our entertainment industry could be the harbinger of change. Then we can transmute from the entertainment industry to the digital content. The cost of devices, 5,000 rupees. I think if we are going to replace our mobile phone, with many in the countryside have it at 1,000 rupees or so. The cost of replacement from 1,000, if it is 2,000, that's fine. So I think price point to fall further below the 5,000 mark is something we look forward to. Competitive tariff, that's one aspect I would like to focus upon, because we in this country have been used to a very competitive tariff as regards to voice sector. The data sector, whether it is competitive enough, is something for all of us to ponder over, because this is where the telecom industry needs to see that there is money to be made in the data segment, because as Rajat did mention, in God we trust, and for the rest we rely on data. The telecom sector may be looking at it, in voice we trust, the rest is all data. So I would like to think that you should bring more data to the table to tell them there's a lot of money to be made if you move to data. So I think that's where I would like to see that new business models need to emerge, and I like to look at it this way. Looking at this entire telecom industry, they need to actually create what is called a consortium approach, where on the one hand, at the back end, they need to get the content providers, and the front end, they need to work alongside with internet service providers and maybe the cable operators. I think that is a continuum which is missing, and we need to have new business models that come. Disruptive business models, that's what I would like to call it. And I think the day the cable operator takes over, I think that will augur well for the rural India. When talking on the cable operator, I'd like to just try to bring this whole point. When are we likely to see a change or movement ahead? I think when cable TV came in India in 1992, that was the start of, let's say, the cable TV revolution. 12 years hence, 2004, saw the spurt of the mobile revolution. And I would put another 12 years hence, 2016, as we'll see the data revolution. And why this 12-year fixation? We in this country are used to the Kumbh Mela, which occurs once in every 12 years. So I would think 1992, 2004, and 2016, these are some, I would say, timelines to go by. And I have a reason for it. The National Optical Fiber Network should be significantly in place by the end of 2015. The 3G rollout also is coterminous with 3G, and the BWA rollout also obligations are by 2015 end. And I look at the digitalization of the broadcasting sector also to occur in 2015-16. So this is why I placed my bet, if one can say so, on 2016 as being the inflection point when you will have the movement on the offtake of data. I would like to thank all the three panel speakers. They have been very, very prescient about it. I now leave the floor open to the audience for posing their questions. You may like to say whom you want to respond to, or maybe more than one speaker can respond to it. Yes, the young lady in spectacles. Yeah, you're the one. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself and then whom you were posing it?
Sure. I'm Abhilasha. I'm working at ICRIER in the IT and telecom team. My question is to Ms. Anu Madgavkar. Ma'am, one of your major findings of the report was very intriguing, that how 50% of the public spending transforms into real outcomes. So that shows that how there's a significant leakage or pilferage within the system. So could you elaborate more on the factors which are contributing to this gap, and how can innovation play an instrumental role in bridging this gap? Also, broadly speaking, that till now we have spoken a lot about new technology solutions which can be brought about. The other aspect of innovation also is how we can use, how we can employ more creative and innovative methods to employ the existing technologies. So if you could elaborate on that, where does the thrust lie? Because the latter method may require less of investment in terms of risk capital, which even Mr. Pitroda spoke about. Thank you.
Thanks, Abhilasha. Great questions. Is this okay? Can you hear me? Yeah. To the first question, let me just spend sort of 30 seconds to explain the notion of 50% does not translate into real benefits. There are two ways to think about this idea of public spending on social services and how it should reach people, right? One type of spending reaches people either by way of physical goods. Yeah. So one type of social spending reaches people in the form of physical goods and the monetary value of those goods. And that type of spending, for example, is the subsidized food grain that's distributed through shops to households who have ration cards. It's relatively, or for example, subsidized kerosene, which reaches people the same way. Now, it's relatively easy to track how much of this is actually reported by people as having been reached, because there are government surveys which actually measure this. And based on those surveys, if you compare what people say they received by way of food or kerosene or Narega payments, for example. Hello? Yeah, sorry. And just compare the value of what they receive versus what the government takes into account as payments made for these programs, it's clear that anything from 50 to 60% on an aggregate reaches somebody. We're not even talking about reaching the poorest of poor, because the leakage is substantially higher there, but it reaches somebody in the system. The rest is leaking away somewhere, right? It's probably leaking away and reaching the open market eventually, but it's not reaching people as subsidized benefits. The other bucket of services is more difficult to think about. These are intangibles, education and health. How do you think about the value of a benefit received by a family which sends its children to a government school, or the value that you realize by visiting a government primary health care center? So the way we estimated that value is to think about how different states in India achieve learning outcomes and health outcomes, and how these are linked to how much money they spend. And it turns out very much like the production possibility frontier, there is an efficiency type of frontier. There are states which achieve better outcomes for every rupee spent, and there are states which achieve worse outcomes for every rupee spent. So comparing India's states on an average to the best performing states within India, so this is not even relative to an absolute benchmark or an international benchmark, this is relative to how better performing India actually delivers outcomes. On an average, there is only a 50% in the case of education and about a 36% in the case of health translation of spending into learning outcomes or health outcomes for people. So that answers, how we came up with that number. The interventions to help drive this effectiveness or efficiency, as you think about it, are very simple in some ways. So the food PDS example, and I think Rajat's presentation also talked about the case study of Chhattisgarh PDS, which they will profile in their report. But it's a great example of very simple technologies which involve things like computerizing the flow of grain from warehouse to food price shop to customer. Just getting a computerized record of how this has actually moved, and then asking and doing a reconciliation of this data. In the absence of digitizing this data, it is impossible to have any visibility into what moves out and what moves into a customer's house. The second very simple technology is SMS. And in SMS type technologies, what are the practices being followed are to send SMS alerts to villages based on when trucks loaded with food grains actually leave warehouses and move towards those villages. So the minute the village community receives these SMSs, they know what to expect and they become vigilant and they become watchdogs to make sure that this is actually coming to them. So simple technologies can help drive this. In health, I think the example I spoke about around rural and primary healthcare is a good example of how you can drive up health outcomes simply by the benefits of tighter monitoring and technologies that enable skill levels of workers who are involved in this, delivery of service. Half the challenges, your teachers in some of these schools or your healthcare workers don't have the skills to deliver these outcomes effectively. It's not even intentional leakage, it's also just the inability to deliver it and the fact that there is very little focus on the actual outcomes. Which brings me to the second question around, is it about new technologies or is it business models which innovate practices around existing technologies? I think that's a great question because across both the global disruptive technologies work as well as what we are seeing from the India stuff, it turns out that the technologies with maximum impact, by the way, are not quote-unquote new technologies. They are very much here and now, and that's actually part of the reason they deliver the most impact, because you can actually expect them to proliferate. And again, we see a lot of examples of simple tweaks in business model which have allowed value capture using a traditional technology. And two great examples, I think, in India are cash on delivery, which we all use when we, Rajat talked about the issue of credit card penetration being low and lots of fear of fraud and lots of discomfort with punching in your credit card details. Flipkart innovated, along with other companies, cash on delivery, which broke through that barrier. Another example is Naukri.com, the job seekers website. So they have added on a whole voice-based support system where you can actually call in and talk to somebody. A lot of people are not so tech savvy. They don't have these very high-end smartphones. They're just not able to navigate everything in the online world. Here you can pick up a phone and talk to a call center agent, get counseled on how to create your CV, get an SMS alert about job openings which are relevant for you, get back on the phone and talk to a person. So this hybrid model of online and voice is another, I think, innovation in delivery model or business model, if you can call it that.
Yes, thank you. Can we have from your sir?
G.L. Pandit from Delhi University. Is it okay? Yes. It's imperative, I think, that we should also think of security of life, along with empowerment, along with quality of life, along with education of children, as an indicator of empowerment. So two questions arise. One is clearly a very empirical question, whether in the last 20 years of technological revolution, of the kind we are talking about, whether there has been any improvement in the environment, in the environment in which women and children feel highly insecure in this country, across rural and urban areas. It's a serious problem, which the government has failed to solve and will fail to solve in the coming 50 years also, I believe. So, and the second question would be, what could we expect from technological innovation, innovative thinking, under all categories of top technologies or new technologies in the next 20 or 50 years, whether we could think of solutions for application to improve the environment in which the degree of insecurity is reduced radically so that children and women feel secure. This is important because, you see, if we talk of education, think of how many children drop out because of insecurity. Think of how many children drop out. There's a huge gap then created between child's education and the boys and so on. That's why I raised this issue. Thank you.
So you may like to...
Yeah. I'll take a crack at it and then others should add. So completely agree with you that the notion of meeting people's needs is not only about filling their stomachs or thinking about education and health, but it is heavily linked with the much more basic fundamental need of physical security. No debate on that question at all. We did look at the data, but, and maybe Rajat has looked at the data far more, but the conclusion we reached looking at the data was that it is very difficult to look at recorded data on crime statistics, law and order, number of complaints, and things like that as an indicator of the true prevalence of physical security on the ground. This is because sometimes better governance in police stations may lead to an increase in recorded crime statistics because police stations are actually open to recording FIRs. In India, we have an even more fundamental problem, which is that probably 80% of all these issues are not even in the formal system and recorded as data, which is why we were not very comfortable drawing conclusions on whether technology can drive improvements in physical security based on macro data or numbers. However, we have seen interesting examples, and I think EMRI is one such example, the emergency medical service, which is basically run through a call center where you can call for emergency services. Now, what was very interesting is that we hear that a lot of these services are now co-located with police personnel being in the call center with call center agents, and that's happening in a constructive way. What it means is there is, of course, a first alert going into the police system based on the nature of the emergency. But even more interesting, they are able to do big data type analytics to look at that data and to say that these are the pockets of the city or the state which are particularly prone to calls coming in, and they are of this nature, right? Therefore, there will be some sort of recommendation, if you will, to the police services saying that either beef up your presence there or improve the lighting there, or some such feedback loop which is at least looking at data analytics and feeding that back, which all of us have seen is actually quite successful as you think about big data applications in other parts of the world. So at least encouraging emerging signs that technology can help drive this. But I would hesitate to say whether there is macro data that actually proves that this is the case in India already.
Just a quick thing to endorse what she said. There have been some studies that offhand I can't remember, but I'm sure I can dig them out, which have looked at randomized evaluations of attempts by various police forces around the world. None in India that I know of. These are mainly in the West. However, which have found to some extent not, there's a variety. So I think the literature is still emerging. But on the other hand, a very common thing to say it's not an easy thing to study. Let me give you. I know that we bought our first cell phone when my wife, driving on a lonely road, this is in Washington, at night, had a flat and was stuck. And this was, fairly dark, etc., and this was a part which is considered unsafe. Fortunately, somebody came and gave their mobile phone, and I was able to get there. But having said that, when I gave this example in the United Kingdom to somebody, they pointed out that in a large part of many American cities and UK cities, the mobile phone became the biggest single target of muggings in certain parts of the city. So was the mobile phone encouraging, was providing safety or not? I'm giving this more in a point of view that these are all complicated things. In the end, you can't, technology by itself is not the, the magic bullet, let me put this. Yeah.
I'd like to request Rohan to raise his question. Next.
Rajat wanted data, so maybe. We used to do something called teleuse at bottom of the pyramid, 6 countries study, 12 languages, about 10,000 randomly selected participants. And when we asked people about their ability to save money, various kinds of things on a 5-point scale. The highest score was always the ability to respond to emergencies. That was where it was coming. And this is socioeconomic groups D&E. So that's a piece of data. We no longer do this, but we finished the last study in 2011. I wanted to come back to one of the points that Rajat made about payments and the rather conservative approach taken by the government regulators in India, and maybe how that could be a recommendation. What is interesting is that we did a recent study, again about a 4,000, 5,000 sample, micro entrepreneurs employing between 0 and 9 persons, again bottom of the pyramid, in Dhaka, Patna, Delhi, Colombo, and a few other places. What we found, what surprised me, I'm not going to get into the details, was that 9% of the electricity payments in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, were being made using mobile. Nowhere else did we see that. In most other places, people were physically going and making the payments. Going back to your slide, Anu, you were talking about not people saving time because they were able to do things like this. So now I made a few phone calls to find out what's going on. I mean, there is a service called bKash in Bangladesh, because I was involved in the debates. Should it be mobile-centric? Should it be bank-centric? And so on. And there's this guy who went and actually developed a service with BRAC Bank called bKash, and he's got 11 million users already on the system. He's solved the problem. My question to you, Rajat, do we want the government or do we do a workaround?
Yeah, I guess that's a comment, but I think if the policy is still constraining, market will come up with a solution. And let's hope there's some entrepreneur in India who comes up with such a solution.
So my question is from Rajat again. You put a very informative presentation. What could be the roadmap to have a harmony of all this exercise? For all the up and down for the apps, internet, mobile, and that thing.
Well, I mean, the quick answer to that is we are in the process of doing exactly that. I mean, as I said in my presentation, I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to say that we have all the answers right now. We've collected pieces of the puzzle together. We know where the constraints are. We need to piece it together. And I think this conference, since the morning, has been very informative and very educative, because we need to piece together the spectrum puzzle as well, the infrastructure puzzle, the apps, service delivery, and we need to piece it all together. We've got answers. Some of them we knew, some of them are interesting, some of them are innovative. I think what I can say at this stage is, since the morning, this has been very encouraging. I think we have some more questions, some more hypotheses that we'll test. The road ahead lies, I mean, I wouldn't say that ICT is going to be, overly dominant, but ICT is going to be overwhelmingly present in most policies that the government enunciates in the future, because ITC delivery mechanisms are going to be cheaper, more effective, quicker, more transparent, and with better governance. But that's the supply side. On the demand side, we also need to create some interventions such that users, why should you have bKash kind of stuff? It shouldn't be there. But it's there because of the reluctance of users. Maybe it's policy environment, maybe the user not comfortable releasing their credit card information. They don't want to do it. In fact, I was in Bangkok once and I used my credit card, and I got a message from my credit card company saying that please change the number of your credit card, because you've used your credit card in a very risky environment and it's likely to be misused. I don't know if it's happened with any of you. It's happened with you. So now, if instances like that occur, then you'd be reluctant to use your credit card and leave your number out in the open. So, I mean, I think that's a good question, but it's also a very difficult question.
How to overcome that hurdles, I want to ask.
Sorry?
How to overcome that problem?
I think we